Quick disclaimer, this video is going to have spoilers, so yeah.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Nick, and I hope you guys are doing well whenever you're checking out the latest video here on the YouTube page. Today, my friend, we have another terrific TV-related video for you guys, and this is going to be a follow-up to a video that I made about a year ago now, a review on a particular show that is one of my favorites, but also something that I've talked about in the past here that recently concluded its second season. This is going to be a review and breakdown of season 2 of How I Met Your Father. Now, as I stated previously, this show, when it first premiered, was one of my favorites of the year of 2022, and it was definitely one of my most anticipated shows from that season because, of course, it is a standalone spin-off slash sequel to the original How I Met Your Mother, which, if you don't already know, is my favorite TV show of all time. And there was a lot of hype surrounding this show. The cast, of course, really great in that sense, and a lot of the dynamics of the characters I thought worked really well. Season 1 overall, I thought was pretty solid. I know that might be a hot take, and a lot of people were kind of disappointed by it or let down by it, but I thought, honestly, that the characters as they existed on their own merits, without the need for any guest stars, without the need of the original How I Met Your characters coming back into it, the original cast of the series was not needed to make this show good. That is my personal opinion. Of course, you are allowed to disagree with that, but overall, I thought season 1 was solid. Going into season 2, I think there was a little bit of a different expectation from the fandom. Generally speaking, for those who came into it as How I Met Your Mother fans, I think the final episode of season 1 with the guest cameo of Ramen was definitely a sign that the show is moving in a different direction. Not necessarily better or worse than what it had been, but just a different narrative. There were, I think, a lot of people, probably more than most folks would assume, that are watching this that have never seen the original How I Met Your Mother, which is kind of surprising to me just because of how big that show was in its heyday and, you know, how popular it's been since it's left TV in the last 10 years. But there have been a lot of people out there that have claimed to never seen the original How I Met Your Mother, that walked into How I Met Your Father as a fan of sitcoms, as a fan of comedy, as a fan of these types of shows that don't really get made much anymore, especially on streaming. Going into the season 1 finale, different expectations, of course, different outcome, different narrative that was sort of put into place at that moment forward. One that I think kind of sets the tone that this is a show that's built on buzzworthy, headlining, grabbing guest stars and trends from the past that are different than you see today in the streaming era. This show really rests on the idea that the old network sitcoms like How I Met Your Mother from the 2000s could work in the streaming era as long as you get people talking about something else that's a part of it to draw them in first. The strength of these characters on their own, a lot of people will tell you they don't have much weight to them. I personally disagree. I think that season 1, very solid as it exists as just a comfort show, easy digestible comedy that is a nice alternative to the heavy dark dramas and narrative serialized shows that you might see surrounding it when you're flipping through Hulu. A lot of people would definitely argue against that, though. And having Robin as this sort of like buzzworthy, you know, cameo guest star headlining all of these, you know, talking points really set the narrative in motion that this is what this show needs in order to be successful. And going into season 2, that was sort of the biggest sort of cloud that hung over this entire season, in my opinion. I felt like there were a lot of moments where the characters didn't really get a chance to shine. They didn't really get a chance to develop themselves as much as I wanted them to, and as much as I knew they could, because they are solid characters even outside of all the celebrity buzzworthy stuff. I really like Sophie. Hilary Duff, of course. I think that she is the anchor to this show. She is really what keeps this whole group together. She's really the glue of the whole matter. And I really like her performance. I'm just a Hilary Duff fan in general, but especially on this show, she's kind of coming out of her shell a little bit, doing some things that are a little outside of her comfort zone, which I really appreciate, especially as someone who, like I said, really likes comedy, grew up with the old school Disney and Nickelodeon shows like Lizzie McGuire, of course. I think that this is a really interesting, pathway in her respective career that is really making her a dynamic performer, even outside of what she's known for already. You have characters like Charlie, who is my favorite of the bunch. Very, very just witty dude. Really works well with everyone. I think his chemistry, especially with Valentina, of course, works really well. And then, of course, you have some of the other smaller characters that get some time to shine in this season and develop their own stories. Like Ellen, of course, her relationship gets some episodes to be a focal point. And then, of course, the main crux of the series of Jesse and Sophie and their ship as well. Here's the main thing going into the season that was already a sign of it's going to be a little bit of a make or break, is the fact that it was twice as long as season 1. That is generally, I think, a positive. As it stands, I think that's a positive thing for any show to have, is just more material. Especially on a show like this where the episodes are really quick, they're really fast paced. You're only going to get one 20-minute episode every single week. There's a lot of good that comes out of that in terms of having it stretch out across many months and get people coming back to check out the story over and over again, as opposed to, say, a Netflix show that you might see more routinely where it's going to drop all at once. The binge model is what people are more used to now. And that show's not really going to thrive after it's been released after about a month because people have already seen it. They've already talked about it. There's really nothing new to add to the conversation. That is something that I think in general, How I Met Your Father definitely excels in, is just keeping the conversation alive. Every episode, even if it's not the greatest, admittedly, has a lot of talking points about it, keeps the mystery alive in terms of who the father might be. Of course, that's the whole focal point of the narrative. And having that discussion every week is something that I really value, especially as someone who makes YouTube videos about TV, loves to talk about TV with random people online. That is a really valuable aspect of this show that very few have. Even if, like I said, the episodes aren't the best on their own, that community that thrives off of it is really, really insightful. Now let's talk about the quality itself on these episodes, because I've already kind of mentioned how this show fits into the modern day narrative of the TV scene and the culture that surrounds it, but does it work just on its own as a watchable show? I think that there are moments in this season where it's honestly the best it's ever been, and arguably just as good, if not exceeding, the original How I Met Your Mother. But there are definitely moments at the same time that are completely wasted, totally dead air, that serve no purpose whatsoever. There are some scenes very early on that paint this picture that they kind of already have doubts about where to take this story. There are moments where these characters are put in situations that feel very tepid, very stale, that don't really feel very dynamic, and that kind of play out as very dated versions of older, more lively sitcoms from even as far back as the 50s and 60s. Not inherently a bad thing, because comedy has always evolved. Comedy's always been there as it existed, as far as TV goes. And a lot of those older shows still get played many, many times in reruns, and a lot of people still love watching them even to this day. But there are moments in this show where there's slapstick or there's some physical comedy that just feels very dated and just very out of place. And I don't think that it's really at fault of the writers or even the producers. It's just something that this show is trying to make it stand out, to make it fit against the standard narrative of today's streaming, that just doesn't work. One of the best moments for this show, especially early on, was the storyline that Sophie was going to reconnect with her dad. This is accompanied by another major cameo of one of the original How I Met Your Mother actors, in this case Neil Patrick Harris, reprising his role as Barney Stinson. This, I thought, was well done, if only because it wasn't put as the center point. He, as a character, wasn't the main draw of this episode. It was a perfect setup to this sub-story that I thought was played out really well, had a good range of emotional moments and dramatic moments to stuff that made you laugh, and all in all fit into the overall story in a way that felt very reminiscent of old How I Met Your Mother. That being said, my main criticism of that plot is that it really only runs for about 5 or 6 episodes. It's really only about a quarter of the entire story. I feel like there are a lot of subplots in this season that do that only last a few episodes and then are kind of either forgotten about or, are sent off on a very whimper kind of note. There's a whole plot line about Valentina getting married or potentially getting married to this dude named Swish. I thought that was very forgettable. That didn't really work at all for me. As I mentioned earlier, there's moments with Ellen and her girlfriend Rachel that I thought were, well done. But again, that kind of, ends on a bit of a sad note, a bit of a whimper. There's just really nothing that sticks, and that unfortunately is another thing that sort of hangs over this season. A lot of these plot points that have good intentions and that could be executed well just don't really feel very fleshed out. What it trades it for is a ton of these celebrity guest stars that, again, add nothing to this narrative. You have people like Neil Patrick Harris that, are nice to see, and that would be a fine addition to the show. His particular episode I thought was well done because, again, he's not the focal point of it. But then you have really stupid episodes where they have this plot line where they meet up with NSYNC, Joey Fatone is there and Lance Bass, and they're like just gonna hang out at this party. It literally adds no value to the overall show. This is the dead air that I'm talking about, where there's just so many moments that just lead to nothing, that just lead nowhere, And I know that there are episodes of the original How I Met Your Mother that do this too. They in their own right, had a lot of guest stars, especially later in the show. But I feel like that was only after they developed a fleshed out narrative and when they were just kind of having fun with it at that point. A lot of that doesn't come until much later, until seasons like, 5 and 6, after they had already gotten a lot of the initial characters, fleshed out and really developed as people that you understood and that you knew all the ins and outs of. But this show is doing it so early on because they had so much success with the season 1 attempts, they're just doubling down on that. And to me, that feels very cheap. And again, it shows your lack of confidence in your own characters, which is unfortunate because when they get to develop their characters in the season, it works very well. That leads me to talking about what was by far the best moment from this show up until this point, which was the finale. This absolutely crushed it in terms of all of my expectations going into it and how I feel about going into this show into the future, which is something I'll talk about in just a sec. This finale episode was easily the best of the entire series so far, a 10 out of 10 masterpiece in my opinion, honestly rivaling some of the best that the original How I Met Your Mother does. And the reason why is because they only focus in on these characters. It is a bottle episode, so they're trapped into this scenario where they have to talk. There's real dialogue, there's real weight to it. They're not doing this stupid slapstick Three Stooges knockoff that they were doing initially. It's very, very confident and very competent in its storytelling. And what's really interesting about it is they actually take a storyline from the original How I Met Your Mother and just repurpose it in a way where you kind of get the impression that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The original How I Met Your Mother episode in question has this sort of, message that these characters are very close, but when put in this situation of this hurricane, they kind of do start to get under each other's skin a little bit. And it feels very realistic. It feels very raw. That feels like something that would happen in real life with your friend group or with your family. And it plays out in a very realistic and grounded way that for a show that can be very goofy at times does feel like a step back in a way where it really earns itself this emotional weight that it's built up over all this time. In a lot of ways, the How I Met Your Father episode that replicates that does that exact same thing to a perfect degree. This is also coupled in the idea that there is a big plotline revealed at the very end of the episode in which two of the main characters, Charlie and Valentina, are revealed to have a kid in the future, and that is something that is sort of the draw in seeing how that plays out going forward when she hooks up with Drew, who is Sophie's ex. There's a lot of moments like that where they sort of tease something, and then, like I said earlier, it doesn't really play out going forward, or they only have it for a few episodes, and it kind of ends on a bit of a whimper. I feel like with this finale, it really showcased that these, writers and such are very certain of how this is going to go forward. And it gives me a lot of optimism that if season 3 ends up coming out, is going to be at that same level, because they now have a real clear vision on how this show is supposed to be presented and the reasons why people would want to watch it. All that being said, do I think, given everything that's going on, that season 3 is going to happen, or is it going to live up to this hype? And that's a question that I honestly don't know. We are in a bit of a really, really uncertain path right now. It is very, very difficult to absorb every story, all the news that's going on, and kind of pick through all of the filler, all the noise, and see what's really important at the end of the day. If Hollywood, if Hulu, if Disney, whoever is sort of, putting their thumb on the scale here, decides that this is just not a show worth preserving, which, given the fanfare or lack thereof fanfare from season 1 into season 2, I wouldn't be surprised by, it very much could sour the reputation not only of this series, but potentially of the original How I Met Your Mother, which would, of course, be a bummer as someone who loves it. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of aspects to this whole ecosphere right now that are more important than getting the answers to what this show has provided. If these writers, if these actors are not being treated fairly, if they're not being compensated, that of course is a much more important issue to tackle than how we find out how Alex came to be, I don't want to make this too involved with all that, because this video is not, addressing that, and it's really not something I ever want to talk about on this channel because so many other people have already done it. All I'm going to say though is, as much as I love talking about TV, it is a very tough industry. It is a very layered industry with a lot of things that I think the average person would never comprehend, because they're never in a position where their work is going to be viewed by so many people and be judged and critiqued by so many people like you and me who make comments or videos about their work and post them online. Do I feel like I should have this sort of guilt or this sort of, responsibility to treat my opinions differently because the situation is going on? Not really. Those opinions are ones that I hold, that I have the right to believe in, that I have the right to say. Is it something that is going to be harder for those people to maybe, cope with when you have so much of these people just, critiquing their work in an unfair way, when they probably weren't able to fully flesh out the story the way that they wanted to? Probably, But if we're the intended audience and we use our platforms to inform these individuals how we want to see these stories put forward in the future, it's all because we like it too much to see it disappear forever. It's all because we have such a passion and love for this medium that we don't want to see it go extinct. We want to make sure that what you're putting forward is only benefiting the overall good that this industry can do and not harming it or impacting it in a negative way. Unfortunately, How I Met Your Father is an example of a show that potentially does have some negative impacts because it is a legacy spin-off sequel to an established brand that was not taken very well by its intended audience, and very much has a lot of problems to it that can't be solved overnight, that need time to work themselves out, that need time to work out those kinks. Just like how the industry itself very much has developed over time, and this strike is not something that's going to disappear overnight. It's going to take months, potentially years, to settle a lot of these disputes and eventually turn the page into a new chapter where everybody is going to thrive equally and very much have the best possible content to put forward. But there is something that I think that How I Met Your Mother, even with season 2 not being as strong as season 1, definitely showcases much better than most other shows. And that is circling back to this idea that this community is thriving around it with this integral mystery as part of the show, with those community discussions, and a show that has as many peaks and valleys as this does, as many highs and lows as this does, is a much more interesting topic, at least to me, to discuss with other people than a show that universally is understood to be amazing or bad. In this case, being able to come to a show every single week and not exactly know where it's going to go next. If they're going to introduce a new plot line, if they're going to end this one, is it going to be a really great episode? Is it going to be a really shitty episode? There's a lot of things that we know are very predictable, that are very consistent, that serve their place in our lives. Very much so. Couldn't do it without them. But on the other hand, it is very nice to know that there's something that is going to challenge us, is going to intrigue us every once in a while. Maybe there comes a day where, you look back on it and you're like, man, there was a lot of dead air there. There was just a lot of wasted time. Maybe I should have watched something else. But to me, having those discussions and having those valuable insights with other people gives you a lot of perspective that you otherwise wouldn't see if everyone was on the same page about everything all the time. If this strike wasn't a thing, I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't know how truly insufferable a lot of these executives can be, how truly deranged some of these people at the top can be. All of that information would have just stayed behind closed doors. But because there were disagreements, because there were people who didn't see eye to eye, now all of that information is coming out in droves for everyone else to have an opinion on. And unless you have different perspectives with other people from time to time, and you have those valuable discussions, you can't grow individually, and your respective circle can't grow equally either. How I Met Your Father, I think, is one of the most interesting shows on TV, and I would still consider it to be pretty solid. Even though there were some moments that I really didn't like from the season, even if there were some plot lines that didn't really go anywhere, I think that this show holds a very unique spot in the current day era of TV, one that I love talking about with other people because it is such a unique type of series. There's very few traditional reviews on this channel, as you may have noticed by now. I love TV, but I really don't like doing traditional stand-up reviews like this. How I Met Your Father is the rare exception where this video is the second review that I've done for this one show. I have done one for Breaking Bad. In that case, I took a very different route than most people would, kind of talking about some of the things that I didn't like about the series, kind of playing devil's advocate in a way, and as a counter argument to a lot of the praise that it's gotten out there. And in this video, I'm kind of doing the opposite, where I'm giving How I Met Your Father praise in a unique way that I haven't seen most people do. As much as I love talking about TV and giving my opinions online, I don't really like doing reviews all that much. And I don't really like watching people's reviews, to be honest with you. My buddy Mike over at Mike's Talks and Thoughts does reviews all the time. Episode reviews for different series that are currently ongoing, season reviews, even full series reviews. And even though I do like his content, I do tend to skip some of those videos every once in a while because I feel like the review format has gotten pretty stale and boring. If it's something current and relevant, and especially a show that I'm really, really dedicated to, I'll watch a few other videos. But at some point, when you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people commenting or writing or making videos on the same stuff, you're going to run into the fact that there's only so many ways to talk about this show. And eventually you just kind of have to disconnect from it. I much prefer making videos where I just showcase stuff in its raw form and let you decide if that's something you want to see more of going forward. I like presenting compilation videos where you get a different viewpoint on a bunch of different stuff rather than one really deep and, specific viewpoint on just one item. It's just a very different format that I think works really well for YouTube that I don't really see a lot of other people do. And as much as there are really talented content creators out there that have very interesting ways of presenting their own opinions, at the end of the day, what they're saying is usually the same thing as most other people. How I Met Your Father exists in a very unique bubble that is separate from a lot of other shows out there. I mentioned in my season 1 review that there's only a couple other shows that you can really compare this to and liken it to that are similar in a lot of different ways to how this show is presented, and those being Two Broke Girls and iCarly 2021. And even then, I feel like those two shows are very unique in their own right compared to a lot of other stuff that was out at the time when they were new. How I Met Your Father being a multicam sitcom comedy in 2023 on a streaming service like Hulu is just such a rare feat, because other Hulu shows that are big right now would be like The Bear, which is much more, serious and focuses in on the, stylized cinematography and the colors and, the visual aspects of it, much more than How I Met Your Father would, which is, it's a very different type of show. I think that there is a lot of value in looking over both good and bad content. There's a lot of good value in discussing all of those things with other people that have different opinions than yours. But ultimately, it comes down to you willing to give up your own time and dedicate some of it into watching it and forming your own opinion. How I Met Your Father is a show that is going to challenge some people. Season 2 improved on some things, very much, kind of dropped the ball on other aspects. But ultimately, I think it's worthwhile because it is something that really doesn't exist much anymore. It's really a show that doesn't have much of an identity to it in terms of being able to pair it with other things on TV right now. And that to me is ultimately where the value in this show lies. If it's not really something that you often do, reviews or discussions with other people or posting online your opinions on TV, I don't really think that there's a lot to draw you in here for. Even as someone who does enjoy the show just on its own, I don't think there's much value in that if you're not using it to do something in this space. Of course, I'm not saying that you have to review shows in order to appreciate it, but I think that's the majority of why someone would want to watch this in the first place. And ultimately, that is the reason why I continue to watch it, even if at moments it doesn't really do much for me. All in all, I think that season 2 of How I Met Your Father is about a 7 out of 10. I wouldn't put it as high as season 1, but it certainly did have its moments, and the finale is extremely, extremely well put together and easily the best episode of this show yet, which gives me a lot of optimism for what the future has in store for this series. But ultimately, those are just my thoughts on How I Met Your Father Season 2. Let me know what yours are in the comments below. If you thought it was really good, if you thought maybe it was a little more disappointing than Season 1, anything you have to say, I'd love to hear it. As well as what you think about this idea that it fits into the general culture or narrative of TV. What role does it play nowadays? Where does it fit as far as comparing it to other shows? And ultimately, are you someone that does value discussions and other people's perspective when it comes to TV? Or are you just someone who very much just watches it for your own entertainment? I'd love to hear what you have to say on that as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have a lot more TV-related content coming very soon. I'm really excited to present it with you. We got some big projects in the works that I know a few people have been waiting very patiently to see, so I'm going to get those out as soon as possible, as well as sharing this out with everyone who loves TV just as much as us. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care, and we will see you in the next one.